DW Inside Europe.
Hello and welcome. I'm Kate Laycock in Germany. On today's programme, before the shooting, we discuss the many political lives of Slovakian Prime Minister Robert Fico.
So Fico finds himself in an incredible predicament, right? On the one hand, his political scene is falling apart. And on the other hand, because he's losing power, he actually is in risk of getting in jail.
Ammo for Ukraine. Czechia plots its own course. View from Kyiv, a critical juncture for Volodymyr Zelensky. And AfD Czech, it's been a tumultuous week for Germany's far right. Slovakia's nationalist populist Prime Minister Robert Fico was rushed to hospital on Wednesday after being shot multiple times in an assassination attempt, which has drawn unanimous condemnation from European leaders. But who is Robert Fico, Slovakia's longest-serving Prime Minister, and how has he shaped his country? To discuss this, I'm joined by Zuzana Botikova, a radio journalist and producer with Slovak Public Radio and Television, and Dominik Zielinski, a sociologist with the Slovak Academy of Sciences. Zuzana, Robert Fico is born in 1964 into a working-class family in communist Czechoslovakia. Maybe you could take it from there.
Yeah, I think this very setting of him being born to a working class family in Topolčany, a smaller town, maybe 2 or 3 hours away from Bratislava, from like the very center, and being very ambitious, I would say from very early on in his life, sprung him to the career that he eventually had, a career of professional politician.
Right, so he enters politics with the Communist Party, but then only just a couple of years later, in 1989, the Velvet Revolution happens and everything changes, right, Dominik?
No, I mean, it clearly did change the landscape of Czechoslovakia. It was a major transformation from the sort of state-planned socialist regime onto a capitalist system and liberal democratic system. So it was a kind of watershed moment, obviously also for the communist cadres. However, actually, many of them were quite successful because of the cultural capital, because of the access to opportunity structures, to resources. Robert Fico was definitely one of them. He found his place in the new post-communist social democratic left. And also, must be definitely mentioned that the Velvet Revolution was also a very important moment in Czechoslovakia due to kind of national development, because it led eventually in 1993 to the kind of velvet divorce of what is now Czech Republic and Slovakia.
Robert Fico founds a new party, Smer, and in 2006 they win a landslide victory, which catapults Fico into the Prime Minister's seat for the first time. Over to you, Zuzana.
Robert Fico becomes the Prime Minister only 2 years after Slovakia joins the EU, and he finds his way around. He's a well-educated, politically versed, and he knows the advantages of the common European system as well as the potential disadvantages that he can use, again, to his advantage. For a certain period of time, he's a big advocate of even having Slovakia join the very core of the European Union. He's on board when Slovakia joins the common currency. It makes sense for him as a political leader of that country as well.
Fico scores another landslide victory in 2012 and wins again in 2016, in large part due to his fierce anti-migration rhetoric during the Syrian refugee crisis. But he has to resign just 2 years later in tumultuous circumstances. What happens?
That's the turmoil that appears on the Slovak scene, political scene, social, civic, the whole thing that comes after the murder, the assassination of the investigative journalist Jan Kuciak and his fiancée Martina Kushnirova in February of 2018. The strong narrative that runs in the days, weeks following the murder is the very strong tie of the Slovak government to organized crime, and the organized crime being responsible for the murder. And first investigative reports even track the connections up to the government's office, which Robert Fico is leading at that very moment, and potentially even to his person per se, even though not particularly him, but his close circle of aides and people he worked with. So he admits that this is a time of crisis and that to keep things at peace, he steps down.
Robert Fico at that point feels that he's very kind of unjustly punished. And this also opens a conflict apparently within the ranks of his party. And if Robert Fico is very proud of something, he's very proud of being a political leader who actually directs the most successful party in the short Slovak political history. It is a party that actually integrated like almost all the remaining left-wing parties. And he's very, very proud of that. And because he has to step down as a prime minister and his protege, Peter Pellegrini, comes up, there emerges a split between this kind of old and new leadership. I think that this fueled a lot of bad blood within the party that escalates just after COVID hits, when the party actually loses this election, as Zuzana mentioned, and there emerges a split within the party, and Hlas, a new, more liberal, social democratic alternative emerges and immediately takes basically almost all Smer votes. So Fico finds himself in an incredible predicament, right? On the one hand, his political scene is falling apart. And on the other hand, because he's losing power, he actually is in risk of getting in jail. And at this point, what he does is that he realizes that, okay, the moderate voters who are willing to go for a more moderate, more liberal left wing are probably out of the question. So who do I have to turn to? And he basically finds this COVID denial sphere, a sphere of alternative media, a sphere of this kind of niche of pro-Russian sentiment in Slovakia, and very actively begins to pander to these sentiments. He starts to appear in like these YouTube live stream alternative channels. He organizes anti-COVID protests. They spread the kind of anti-vaccination hysteria. And eventually, when COVID kind of merges with the Russian invasion of Ukraine, they take a fairly radical stance in that issue as well. Again, trying to poach a little bit of a new electorate.
Fico's most recent term of office has been characterised by attacks on the media, pivoting towards Russia, etc. And then, suddenly this week, he's shot and rushed to hospital in a critical condition. Now, things are so unclear at the moment that I'm not going to ask you to speculate on the week's events, Dominic, but I would like to ask you about the significance of this particular moment in Slovakian history.
It's somehow chilling because one really has to wonder what will be the institutional outcomes, the outcomes for the political system itself, because we have had strong worries about possible Hungarian-style illiberalization of Slovak politics. And it's a question to what extent this will accelerate and kind of help the coalition politicians to lay off the scruples in driving this process.
So a critical juncture for Slovakia. I'd like to thank both of you for joining me to discuss it with us.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for the invite.
Slovakian radio journalist Zuzana Botikova and sociologist Dominik Zielinski there. As we just heard, Slovakia under Robert Fico has been pivoting towards Russia. In contrast, Czechia, or Czech Republic, historically the other half of the former Czechoslovakia, has been a staunch Ukrainian ally, even going so far as to spearhead an independent initiative to gather much-needed ammunition for Ukraine. With Ukraine currently severely outgunned and still waiting on roughly half of the 1 million rounds of ammunition the EU had pledged to deliver by March, the initiative could not come at a more critical time. Terry Schultz reports from Prague.
The Ukrainians call it shell hunger, and more than 2 years into Russia's all-out war on them, they are starving.
The Ukrainians are not running out of courage. They are running out of ammunition.
NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg has long urged allies to produce more faster, dig deeper, and even to go below previously recommended national stockpile levels to send more shells to Ukraine.
Together, we have the capacity to provide Ukraine what it needs. Now we need to show the political will to do so. Every day of delay has real consequences on the battlefield in Ukraine.
That Ukraine needed far more ammunition than its allies could provide and produce has been evident since very early in the war. But a March 2023 European Union plan to send Ukraine 1 million shells within 1 year only managed to send about half by the self-imposed deadline, though the effort continues. Meanwhile, however, another effort was quietly gathering steam far from Brussels and had been underway since even before Moscow launched the full-scale invasion.
We have started preparing for the potential delivery of military material and all sorts of weapons and ammunition to Ukraine already since late December 2021.
Ambassador Tomáš Kopečný heads up this effort for the Czech Foreign Ministry.
So we were gathering different types of weapons on a large Excel sheet, and we were preparing for the possibility that somebody would actually buy it from the list and we would be able to deliver it to Ukraine ASAP. So when the war started, we already had 2 months of preparations behind us, and so the only thing we needed was somebody who would pay for it.
It differs from the EU plan in that, working with Czech weapons producers, they found existing stockpiles of ammunition around the world, some in countries that would not want to sell directly to Ukraine for political reasons, but they would sell to the Czech government. David Hotz is CEO of STV, a major manufacturer and one of those companies using its contacts to help the initiative.
We offered to the Czech government the ammunition from our production, but mainly from production of the foreign states, which are outside of the EU. And that was the point, and that was the change, because the previous initiative, which was made by the European leaders, was oriented mainly to the European producers. Now we are buying the ammunition outside and helping to support the Ukrainian fight.
The Czech government bought some initially, and citizens crowdfunded for millions more. Then, Kopečný says, other governments joined in. First the Dutch, then the Danish, and as the effort has become more public, more European governments have contributed funds, and, surprising the Czech organizers, more non-European countries have offered ammunition. Tomáš Kopečný says while his country is very proud of what it's managed to do, the real goal would be to see it get too big to be handled in Prague.
I don't think we would be able to be administratively running such a huge project as a country. We can do our part. We will gladly hand over the system of how we do things. I mean, we will be happy of this not being labeled the Czech initiative anymore.
The first supplies from the Czech initiative should reach Kyiv next month, officials say, with well over 1 million rounds possible over the next year. The EU initiative is also continuing to prioritize ammo deliveries, and Ukraine's allies are looking for more ways to help ease Ukraine's shell hunger in the face of ever-intensifying Russian attacks. Terry Schultz, DW, Prague.
As we just heard there, Russia's offensive in the Kharkiv region is severely stretching Ukrainian defences. According to AFP calculations, Moscow seized 278 square kilometres, that's about 107 square miles of Ukrainian territory between May 9th and 15th, representing the largest territorial gain in a single operation since mid-December 2022. In the light of these concerning advances, we asked DW's Kyiv correspondent Nick Connolly to take stock for us.
These Russian incursions north and northeast of Kharkiv haven't come as a surprise to anyone. Ukrainian intelligence services were warning about this weeks, if not months ago. The same story applies to Western intelligence services. So the big question that everyone is asking themselves now in Kiev is how come it seemingly was so easy for the Russians to cross that borderline? How come are Ukrainians waking up to images on social media of Russian soldiers walking seemingly pretty relaxed, being filmed by drones, no fear of minefields? Just for context, Ukraine retook most of northeastern Kharkiv region in the autumn of 2022. Since then, a lot of money has been spent and there's been a lot of publicity by the government about construction of defences. President Zelensky has been there, and yet in the immediate kind of hinterland of the Russian border, it doesn't seem like much, if anything, was done. And that is causing a lot of anger, a lot of questions here in Kiev today, why it is that Ukrainian soldiers are once again being asked to risk their lives to repel this Russian attack. So it's a difficult situation, and right now, more than 2 years into the war, obviously people are tired, their savings are running out, and those people who haven't already gone, those men who haven't already gone to the army, are people who aren't going to go voluntarily and are being asked now and are being put under increasing pressure if they don't renew and update their information. People face losing access to their bank accounts, their driving licenses no longer being valid. So it is a difficult moment, and it is one in which lots of people are looking at the government and asking if the government, Volodymyr Zelensky's government, have really found a new way of keeping this country going, of moving from the kind of initial shock of the first 6 months, year of the war, to finding a new way of operating that allows Ukrainians to carry on for longer and fight for what could be several years to come. So that is the situation right now here in Kiev. It's not one of panic, but it's one of questioning and of increasing critical voices towards the government. And there's growing expectations here from Ukrainians that the government and that President Zelensky, who has been a figure of great national unity and who often has been excluded from criticism and hasn't been forced to explain why things haven't gone the way they were supposed to because of military reasoning and not wanting to open conflicts within society. That is something that is getting increasingly difficult for him to avoid, and which lots of people are calling on him to be more open and more self-critical.
DW's Kyiv correspondent Nick Connolly there. For the latest from Nick and his colleagues covering the war in Ukraine, download DW's Breaking News app. I'm Kate Laycock in Germany. You're listening to Inside Europe. Finally, this half hour, it is high time for an AfD check. It's been a tumultuous few weeks in the world of Germany's far right, and to unpick it all for us, I spoke to DW's political correspondent, Thomas Sparrow.
It's been a very busy past few weeks for the AfD, for Germany's far-right party. And the latest headline, the latest story is that a German court essentially upheld a status of the AfD as a suspected far-right extremist organization. Now, this might sound actually very complex, but what it essentially means is that Germany's domestic intelligence agency can continue to monitor the AfD, can continue to use surveillance tools against the AfD to determine essentially whether the AfD is a threat to German democracy. And that is something that will definitely be very interesting to follow in the upcoming European Parliament elections, but more importantly, from a German perspective, also in regional elections in some eastern German states in September.
And that decision from the court in Munster was not the only AfD-related court decision to be making headlines this week. A separate court in Halle has made a decision in a case against one specific person, Björn Höcke, the leader of the Thuringia AfD party. What can you tell me about that case?
Björn Höcke, who is one of the most controversial AfD politicians, but is also one of the leaders of the AfD in Eastern Germany, used a Nazi slogan, and the court decided to fine Björn Höcke for using that banned Nazi slogan. Now, it's important to understand that the AfD in both court cases, but in general as well, sees itself as a victim of the political establishment, sees itself as being targeted by the political establishment. So the question in both cases is what kind of impact that will have on AfD voters. There are analysts that are pointing to the fact that maybe the AfD already has an established voter base that will not be moved a lot by these kinds of decisions, that in fact the voters also believe, as the AfD has been stressing, that these courts are not independent but politically motivated to affect the AfD ahead of the upcoming European Parliament elections and the regional elections in the East. And this particular element, these elections in the East, are relevant because Björn Höcke, as you stressed, is the leader of the AfD in Thuringia, one of Germany's eastern states, and a state, by the way, in which the AfD is particularly popular. So the AfD is very popular in the eastern part of the country where those elections are going to be held. And the debate here in the country, here in Germany, is what results will come out of those elections in September and whether the AfD will manage to end up in first place.
We've spoken about the national level. You've mentioned those regional elections which are coming up. But before then, of course, we have the European elections only weeks away. And there have also been very choppy waters for the AfD and in particular for its Spitzenkandidat or lead candidate, Maximilian Krah. Can you unpick this very knotty story for me?
It's absolutely a knotty story. It's absolutely choppy waters as well, because Maximilian Krah, who, by the way, was also already a controversial figure within the party, the lead candidate for the AfD for the European Parliament elections, one of his aides, someone called Jan G., we're not allowed to say his surname for privacy reasons here in Germany, was arrested some time ago, suspected of spying for China. Now, Maximilian Krah himself denies any wrongdoing, but police conducted searches at the European Union Parliament offices of Krah to find and gather more information. And this has again put a spotlight, if you will, on the AfD's relations with countries that are, from a German perspective, rather difficult. So not only China, but there was previously another AfD politician who was accused of having very close ties to Russia. Again, the question here is to what extent the AfD will be affected by this. It is certainly a difficult time for the AfD, but a very different thing might be what kind of political impact that might have when people actually go to the polls.
Thomas Sparrow, DW's political correspondent in Berlin, thank you so much for talking to me.
Always a pleasure.
Only 3 weeks to go before European elections. Make sure that you're subscribed to our podcast so that you don't miss any of our coverage from Germany and across the continent. Our feedback address is insideeurope@dw.com. This is Inside Europe, and I'm Kate Laycock in Germany. This is Inside Europe, and I'm Kate Laycock in Germany. Coming up in the next half hour.
We saw Tbilisi has been full of posters with individual critics of the government's faces on it with the word agent written across it, this kind of thing. It's been all over some anonymous social media pages. Clearly it's orchestrated by the government, but they're not taking responsibility for this.
Authoritarian trajectory. Georgia's parliament passes its controversial Foreign Agents Bill. Other priorities, Catalonia's regional elections deliver surprising results.
Yeah, we can definitely say that there's been a mind change between Catalans or among Catalans, especially because, for example, a public survey here published in Barcelona and in Catalonia recently, they said that, for example, drought and climate change is now the most worrying topic or the most worrying element among Catalans.
Confiscated, Istanbul's police cash in on the proceeds of crime.
Turkey has become a transshipment hub for Europe and the Middle East. There's huge amounts of money floating around here. And look at our wealth amnesty. Bring cash, bring diamonds, we don't really care. Just check it at the border or deposit it into a bank, and we'll never ask questions. This never ask questions part is, of course, completely in violation of the spirit of the global anti-money laundering legislation.
And reimagining the Balkans route via the unlikely medium of fashion.
It means so much because on my worst day, it helped me I believe on myself again. I said okay, whatever you lost, it's okay, but you can make something else.
That is all still to come.
From Bonn, Germany, you're listening to Inside Europe.
There were extraordinary scenes on the streets of the Georgian capital Tbilisi on Tuesday as the Georgian parliament met to adopt a controversial foreign agents law, similar to the law passed in Russia, which enabled Vladimir Putin to clamp down on opposition media and civil society. Tens of thousands of protesters gathered outside the Parliament building and blocked roads in Heroes Square, with protests also taking part in several other cities across the country. The Tbilisi-based online news platform OC Media, which covers the North and South Caucasus region, has been live blogging the protests. Earlier, I caught up with OC Media's editor-in-chief, Robin Fabro, and asked him to explain to me what the law is about and why there is so much opposition to it.
Thank you, Kate. It's a pleasure to come on the show again. So this law is, according to the government, a law to make foreign funding in Georgia more transparent. This is funding of civil society groups and media. The problem with this law is that it's extremely similar to legislation used in Russia, which has completely decimated civil society and media there. It has kind of two pillars, I would say, that are going to pretty much destroy all independent criticism of the government. So the first is the label. Any organization that receives 20% of funding from abroad would be labeled an organization carrying out the interests of a foreign power. Now, clearly, this is not true of these organizations. An environmental organization trying to promote recycling is not carrying out the interests of a foreign power. This is something they want to do. This labeling, it's already sort of de facto enforced because since last year, when they previously tried to pass a legislation, the government has been using this label repeatedly. Now, when they've been passing this law amidst the protests, we saw Tbilisi has been full of posters with individual critics of the government's faces on it with the word agent written across it, this kind of thing. It's been all over some anonymous social media pages. Clearly, it's orchestrated by the government, but they're not taking responsibility for this. The other key pillar, I would say, and this is the more dangerous one, is that any such organization would be subject to monitoring, they call it, from the Ministry of Justice. What this would mean would be that the ministry, the government, would have unlimited access to all internal documents, internal communications. For journalists, they could get hold of confidential sources. So clearly, no media organization or civil society group that has any kind of criticism of the government could operate under those conditions.
Robin, would your organisation, OC Media, fall under the foreign agent category?
So we cover the entire Caucasus region, but we are currently based and headquartered in Tbilisi, Georgia. So we would fall under this law. It's not something we can possibly follow because we could not operate under those conditions. So right now, I think we, along with a lot of organizations in Georgia, are looking for ways to mitigate this damage and not to follow the law because it's simply impossible.
And in the meantime, of course, you and your colleagues are out on the streets of Tbilisi, Robin, covering the protests. What have they been like? There have been tens of thousands of people. Can you think of any equivalent in recent years?
I can't because, these are some of, if not the biggest protests in Georgia's history. Bigger than at the end of the Soviet Union, bigger than in 2003 when there was the Rose Revolution, bigger than when this government came to power. The energy, there is so much anger on the streets, and there is so much opposition to this law, clearly. And I think a lot of people are confused why they're going ahead with this, especially before an election, when clearly it's very unpopular.
Right, so we've got elections coming up in October. What we've also got, of course, is the fact that Georgia is officially still on a path towards EU membership. It was granted candidate status as early as December last year, I think. So, what is going on? Why are the ruling party, Georgian Dream, risking so much to pursue this course?
Everything that is happening right now is the wishes of one single man. This is the Georgian Dream founder, Bidzina Ivanishvili. He's a billionaire. He made his money in Russia. He returned to Georgia to take power, essentially, in 2012. So when you have one man making the decisions, this is the risk. He's been speaking a lot recently, and his officials have been speaking a lot about a conspiracy, that there is a global party of war controlling the West. This is something that the Assistant Secretary of State of the US, these are the conversations he's hearing from officials, that America is controlled by a global party of war and that they have Bidzina Ivanishvili under de facto sanctions already. So he's sort of fighting back. It's extremely unhinged. It's clearly not based in reality. So it's really unpredictable because it's just a single man.
What about checks and balances? Because, the president has been very clearly backing the protesters and said that she intends to veto the law.
So checks and balances in Georgia have been eroded over the years. The courts are in the government's hands 100%. And this is also something standing in the way of Georgia's entry into the EU. The president will veto it, but Parliament has the power to overcome that veto. It's essentially a symbolic move.
I wanted to talk to you, Robin, about policing and about intimidation of protesters and opposition figures, because this is something that you and your colleagues have been documenting in detail. Perhaps you could pick out for me the key points here.
So the police, they have used violence against protesters, often in very random ways. It almost seems like the individual units are losing control because, they're constantly bombarded with these accusations that they're traitors, they're betraying the Constitution. And I think you see that they're tired and it's getting to them. So there are these acts of violence, they beat people up. And there's also this orchestrated campaign. Critics of the government being attacked and beaten by masked men in the middle of the night outside their homes. The government just essentially said nothing about this. And it's so clearly an organized campaign. They're all opposition leaders. They're outspoken critics of the law. So it's really going into some very dark kind of authoritarian place. And the speed to which Georgia has descended to that place it's quite staggering to witness, actually.
Yeah, I was also reading that Georgian Dream is saying that they're going to publish a database of undesirables, so an online database which anybody can access, which has the names of people that they deem undesirable, primarily people connected to the protests.
Right, and this is just one of the things that's come out in the last few weeks that they've said. And I think the fact I even forgot that that existed, it sort of illustrates how fast we're going downhill, because the level to which they want to crush all dissent, it seems, and have no tolerance for that anymore, it's really scary.
Is fear, Robin, the main emotion that you sense when you're out and about reporting from the protests and talking to protesters?
I don't think people are afraid yet. There's the main energy, the main kind of emotions you feel. It's anger, it's defiance. I do think there's probably some fear involved in what people are willing to do, because they see they could get beaten up, they could go to prison for a very long time. So I wouldn't say that's having no impact, but the main mood of the protest, it's just defiance.
So would it be too much to say that the fate of Georgia could yet be decided on the streets?
On the streets or in the ballot box, it's really unclear at this point. It's hard to have hope at a time like this when things are so dark, but I think there is still that chance that the people will prevail, that the opposition will get their act together and offer something real, and that we can actually have some change in this country.
Robin Fabro, Editor-in-Chief of OC Media, thank you so much for talking to me.
Thank you very much.
OC Media is, for now at least, headquartered in Tbilisi, Georgia. Go to oc-media.org to check out their coverage. There was a significant upheaval in Spanish politics last weekend when regional elections in Catalonia delivered a surprising result. For the first time in 14 years, the main Catalonian independence parties lost their majority, meaning governing the region on an independence agenda is now no longer on the cards. So, what is? Well, the socialist PSC won the most votes and the most seats, but not enough to rule on its own. Ashish Sharma reports.
Presidente, shouted supporters of the Catalan Socialist Party, the PSC, at the headquarters in Barcelona, as the results confirmed what many had predicted, that Salvador Illa, former health minister in the government of Pedro Sánchez, and now the leader of the socialists in Catalonia, had won the election. But politics in Spain is not a simple path to follow. Illa won, but not with a clear majority. It means the future of who will actually form a government is still up in the air. But here's the thing. While there was surprise in the decline of the separatist governing party going into the election, Esquerra Republicana, there was also a surprise in how well the conservative Partido Popular performed. In the elections in 2021, they barely got 3 seats in parliament. On Sunday, they boosted that figure up to 15, marking the biggest vote swing of all the participating parties.
Part of this explanation can be explained basically because this former party, Ciudadanos, basically got 0 votes, or got very few votes, and most of these votes went to Partido Popular. But this is not enough to explain the huge increase.
Marc Guinjon is a professor of political science at the Autonomous University of Barcelona. He says it's unusual that an election result is positive for both the left and the right at the same time.
The PSOE has been benefited from the policies performed in Catalonia that has passed this amnesty law, and this party that has dared to act on the Catalan issue. Pedro Sánchez has, of course, acted because he had the hands tied because of a terrible arithmetic situation in the Spanish Congreso. But anyway, he has done it. The PP and the media, there has been a clear backlash among individuals, among conservative individuals that consider that Pedro Sánchez is a threat for the unity of Spain, and that Pedro Sánchez needs to be immediately removed, because otherwise Pedro Sánchez will guarantee a referendum for Catalonia. And I guess that this helps explaining why these 2 parties were benefited.
Celebrarà una sessió ordinària per efectuar una declaració formal de la independència de Catalunya.
This is Carles Puigdemont back in 2017, announcing to thunderous applause in the Catalan parliament the results of an illegal referendum that he as president had organised. It was illegal because it went against the Spanish constitution. It resulted in most of the leaders involved in it being arrested, while Puigdemont fled to Belgium seeking exile, and he's been there ever since. On Sunday night, directing operations in the south of France, his Junts party polled the second highest number of votes and seats in the election. Incredulously, he became kingmaker while in exile. Pedro Sanchez offered Puigdemont an amnesty in return for his party's support to help him get back to power after last year's general election. Puigdemont wants to get back as president, but the collapse of Esquerra Republicana means that even if all the separatist parties get together, they can't reach the 68 seats required to form a government. While the policies of Pedro Sanchez in appeasing the Catalan parties has tamed the call for independence, Gerard Escaich, head of the Catalan news agency, says other issues also played a part in the outcome.
Yeah, we can definitely say that there's been a mind change between Catalans or among Catalans, especially because, for example, a public survey here published in Barcelona and in Catalonia recently, they said that, for example, drought and climate change is now the most worrying topic or the most worrying element among Catalans, with 15% of those surveyed saying that it was their biggest priority or their biggest concern. And in the past, it used to be the relationship between Spain and Catalonia. So the move is now focused to more social issues such as the housing market. There are no affordable houses for Catalans or for Spaniards living here. Rent prices have increased exponentially. The inflation is also one of the concerns that we see. So we have a little bit more of social issues in this election that are now being focused, especially drought. It's been 40 months or over 40 months here in Catalonia, and we still have an ongoing drought. And even though there's recent rain, the situation continues to be alarming.
If Salvador Illa can somehow form an alliance with Esquerra Republicana and other left-wing parties, then it may be possible that Catalonia will see a socialist government that mirrors the national government in one of the most belligerent regions of Spain. But if he fails in that endeavour, it's likely that new elections will be called for in October. Given the pressing issues that are at stake in the region, that's a scenario that will appeal to no one. Ashish Sharma, DW, Madrid.
In the meantime, there are just 3 weeks to go until European elections. So to make sure that you don't miss out on our coverage from around the continent, do subscribe to our podcast. I'm Kate Laycock in Germany. You're listening to Inside Europe. If you've been to Istanbul recently, you may have noticed that the police are now driving some of the world's most expensive sports cars. The cars are the spoils of an ongoing crackdown on organised crime, launched as part of Ankara's efforts to escape international scrutiny over money laundering as it seeks global investment. Dorian Jones reports from Istanbul.
Istanbul traffic police now boast some of the world's flashiest supercars, including Ferraris, Bentleys and Lexus. The cars are being seized in a nationwide crackdown on organised crime, involving narcotic smuggling and international money laundering. Murat Aslam is with the Foundation for Political, Economic and Social Research, an Ankara think tank. He says Turkey's unique geography made it an ideal center for international crime.
Turkey is in between the continents. So once you want to transfer a commodity which is illegal, you must have a step here in Turkey. And in this sense, most criminal gangs in Europe or the United States or South America, well, they have a linkage to the ones here in Turkey. And that's why the police started operations, especially focusing on the ones who has a warrant, arrest warrant by Interpol. It's a process, and Turkey is currently in the middle of it.
Turkey's Interior Ministry is releasing videos of the arrests, with heavily armed police breaking down doors in the middle of the night. vast quantities of cash and guns are recovered at luxury addresses usually associated with Istanbul's high society. Among those arrested are some of the world's most wanted criminals from Europe, Asia and the United States. Most are connected to the illicit drugs trade, with Turkey being a hub for importing and exporting to Europe. Attila Yeşilada is a Turkey analyst with Global Source Partners.
Both according to Interpol and Turkish Narcotics Department of the Police, Turkey has become a transshipment hub for Europe and the Middle East. There's huge amounts of money floating around here. And look at our wealth amnesty. Bring cash, bring diamonds, we don't really care. Just check it at the border or deposit into a bank, and we'll never ask questions. This never ask questions part is, of course, completely in violation of the spirit of the global anti-money laundering legislation.
593 operasyonda 4303 şüpheli gözaltına alındı.
Interior Minister Ali Yerlikaya, at a recent press conference on the crackdown, announced that the 700 arrests have included 50 people wanted by Interpol. Yerlikaya says he's committed to ending Turkey's reputation as a haven for drug kingpins.
31'i yerel olmak üzere 38 mafya tipi.
We've broken up 38 mafia-type crime gangs. 7 were international and 31 were local. We regard drugs as a global disaster, and our main goal in the fight against drugs is to ensure that Turkey becomes an inaccessible and prohibited zone for them. We consider drug crime as the equivalent to terrorism.
The crackdown follows International Anti-Money Laundering Organization, the Financial Action Task Force, or FATF, putting Turkey on its grey list of countries failing to combat global money laundering. Turkey's crackdown on organised crime, along with a tightening of its financial controls, are part of its efforts to remove itself from the grey list and escape its damaging economic impact, says Yeşilada for Global Source Partners.
Put it this way, if we remain on the FATF grey list, from the top of my head, say 20% of the institutions which would otherwise be interested in investing into Turkey probably won't be able to do so because of compliance fears. It is going to be a significant concern when these extensive due diligence work is undertaken, whether to make a particular investment in Turkey.
The Turkish government sees increasing international investment as key to solving Turkey's economic woes, which means the raids on wanted international crime figures seem set to continue, along with the confiscation of their valuable assets. For the Istanbul police, the supply of fancy cars looks set to continue. Dorian Jones, DW, Istanbul.
Just time for one last story this week, and it is an unexpectedly positive one. People taking irregular migration routes through Europe are often painted as a problem, but an exhibition at the European Parliament in Strasbourg has been reminding MEPs that there is potential there as well. The Wearin It Together exhibition displays fashion designed and modelled by residents of the International Organisation for Migration's reception centres in the Western Balkans. Our correspondent in the Balkans, Catalonia, has been learning more about the No Nation Fashion Project.
It wasn't the normal kind of fashion crowd at the European Parliament in Strasbourg, but the opening of the Wearin It Together exhibition was a way to reach an influential audience.
That migration is not only a threat, but can also be an opportunity with great stories.
The No Nation Fashion Project is aiming to change perceptions, not about clothes, but about at least some of the people who design and make them. It all began at a reception centre run by the International Organisation for Migration in Bosnia's capital, Sarajevo.
All the people who are from all over the world, we can help these people here in the Sarajevo because we had the, let's say, similar tragedy before 30 years ago.
Aleksandra Lovric is a fashion designer from Sarajevo who grew up during the siege of the city in the 1990s. She helps people staying at the IOM's reception centres to develop their own talents.
You have also people who are starting from scratch, and also you have the people who have potential, who are working in the retail industry, who are working in the fashion industry, like a graphic designer. Mostly you have the people who are doing production for some huge company on the sewing and on tailoring. Many brands who are the famous brands have their industry, especially in Pakistan, in Afghanistan. Unfortunately, people who need to move from their country, they're searching for a better life. And they're really happy when they see that in the reception center is the small studio where they actually show what they know.
One of those people is Behisht Hafizi. She found the No Nation fashion studio in Sarajevo after an arduous journey from Afghanistan and through the Balkans with her husband and children.
This brand or this fashion corner is in Bosnia. This is not just like a normal brand like Chanel or something. They don't experience something like that. But this brand is for us, that we are express our feelings without any thinking. This corner gave us freedom. I hope in every countries the migrant passed by, they made some corner like this. It means so much because in my worst day, it helped me I believe on myself again. I said okay, whatever you lost, it's okay, but you can make something else. You can make something new.
How did it feel when you saw the clothes that you had designed being on a fashion catwalk?
Actually, in the beginning, this was something unbelievable because me from Afghanistan and just made some designs and it's come to fashion show. It's unbelievable. You can't believe it. And okay, see this one, the catwalk, it's my design. It's what we made with our hands.
The International Organization for Migration hopes that No Nation fashion will alter the way that people on the move in Europe are viewed, not as undesirables or burdens on society, but as human beings with potential who have plenty to offer their host communities.
We want to reduce people moving irregularly. We want to create more opportunities for people to move regularly. But let's recognize the economic growth that countries in the global north are seeing. Migrants have played a key contribution to that.
Ugochi Daniels is the Deputy Director for Operations at the IOM.
What is really striking to me, and I see it time and time again, is that yes, the conditions of the movement and what triggered them moving can be very harrowing and very traumatic. The aspirations across the board, across geographies are the same, wanting to be productive, wanting to have freedoms, wanting to have opportunities, and wanting to have the skills to contribute and showing to their host communities that what they bring is positive.
No Nation fashion has limited distribution for the moment, but if the project helps more people to develop their talents, it could yet become a label to covet. Guy Delaunay, DW, Ljubljana.
And that brings us to the end of the show. This programme was produced by the ever-fashionable Helen Sini, with help from me, Kate Laycock, and sound engineer Ziad Abu Sleiman. By the way, a rocker of the dark jeans and leather jacket look. Inside Europe comes to you from DW in Bonn, Germany.